When you stop texting and calling a man, the very first reaction you're going to trigger in him isn't necessarily emotional, it's ego-driven, and that's important to understand. The initial confusion he experiences isn't because he misses your soul or your conversation. It's because something that was once consistent, something that fed his confidence, his routine, his sense of security, has suddenly been taken away. Now, this doesn't mean he's a bad person. It just means he's human, and like all of us, he notices when attention disappears. Men, whether they realize it or not, often interpret consistency as a form of validation. When you text, when you call, when you're always there, replying quickly or reaching out first, it reinforces something in his mind. She's into me, I've got her. That sense of certainty can become a comfort zone. It tells him that he doesn't have to put in too much effort, doesn't need to chase, doesn't need to wonder. So when that consistent behavior stops, when you pull back without fanfare or drama, he doesn't quite know how to process it at first. His brain scrambles to make sense of the silence. He may even tell himself you're just busy or you're trying to make a point. He might assume it's a phase, that you'll message again when the mood strikes or when enough time passes. In his head, he's still the one in control. That's the ego talking. He's still operating on the idea that you're orbiting around him, even if you've temporarily gone quiet, but then something deeper starts to shift. He starts to check his phone a little more often. Maybe he checks your social media. Maybe he asks mutual friends if they've heard from you. He doesn't say this out loud, but he's wondering, wait, is she really done? And in that moment, he's not confused anymore. He's unnerved, not because he's hurt, yet, but because your behavior doesn't match the script he was following. This is when you start to see the first signs of ego defensiveness. He might become passive, aggressive. He might post something pointed on his own page or act indifferent in public. You might even get a lazy hey text out of the blue, something that's just enough to see if you'll bite, but not enough to show real effort. That's not vulnerability, it's a temperature check. He's trying to see if the emotional tap is still dripping, but here's the key: when you don't respond to that half-hearted attempt, when you don't take the bait, his ego gets bruised. It's no longer about understanding why you've gone quiet. It becomes a mission to get back to the version of reality where he felt secure, admired, and in control. This is why so many women get confused when, after days or weeks of silence, he suddenly starts reaching out again, maybe even acting more interested than before. It feels like progress, but often it's not growth, it's ego panic. He's not necessarily stepping up because he's had a deep revelation about you and your worth. He's stepping up because his ego is unsettled. It's uncomfortable to feel discarded, even if he was the one taking your presence for granted in the first place. You see, we often confuse a man's reaction to distance with love, but not all attention is created equal. Some attention is rooted in panic, some in possessiveness, and some in genuine realization. But the first wave, what you see in those early days of silence, is almost always ego. He's wondering if he's losing his grip, not if he's losing your heart. And if you respond too quickly to that energy, you reinforce the very dynamic you are trying to shift. You teach him that all he has to do is disappear for a little while, wait for your silence, and then throw a crumb to pull you back in. That doesn't build respect. That builds a cycle, a pattern that slowly drains your self-worth over time. And let's be honest, the guy who truly values you doesn't wait until you're silenced to start showing up. He doesn't need your absence to remind him of your importance, but the one who's comfortable in his power. He might need a jolt, and silence is powerful when it comes from a place of self-respect, not manipulation, not bitterness, just quiet clarity. When you stop texting and calling, you create space, and that space is where a man's true intentions get revealed. Will he use that space to reflect, to step up, to grow? Or will he simply react from ego, trying to pull you back just enough to restore his comfort, only to slip back into complacency? The first phase of that silence, those initial days when he notices you're not reaching out, that's where you'll see who he really is without the steady stream of your affection propping him up. It's not about punishing him. It's about protecting your peace and watching how someone behaves when they're no longer being fed emotionally. That's when you see the truth, because when your absence says more than your presence ever had, that's when you know your silence is working. After the initial confusion starts to fade, something more subtle, but far more powerful, kicks in. This is where the emotional realization begins. It doesn't happen instantly. It's not like one day he's confused and the next day he's sitting there reflecting deeply. No, it happens in stages. Silence has a way of revealing more than words ever can, and the longer that silence continues, the more it chips away at the surface, level stories he's been telling himself. At first, he might still think you're trying to make a point. He's assuming that if he waits long enough, you'll fold, that your silence is temporary, just a bluff. Maybe you've gone quiet before and eventually reached out again. Maybe he's used to women doing that, creating space, but not really walking away, and so he waits, possibly with a kind of smug confidence. That's still his ego talking, but then time keeps passing. And you're still not texting, you're still not calling, you're not reacting to his stories, not watching his updates, not finding reasons to accidentally bump into him online. That's when the seed of doubt really starts to take root. Because now it's not just about attention, it's about absence, emotional absence. He starts noticing not just the lack of texts, but the lack of energy, that warmth, that affection, that consistent thread of interest you used to give him. Gone, and in its place is nothing, no anger, no games, no explosions, just silence, and that silence is louder than any argument ever was. Now he's starting to feel the real weight of your disappearance. And it's not about control anymore. It's about connection, or more accurately, the loss of it. This is where his emotional awareness, or lack thereof, begins to show. If he ever relied on your presence to feel good about himself, your compliments, your check-ins, the way you always made time for him, then the emptiness you've left behind isn't just inconvenient. It's disorienting. He might even try to replace that energy quickly just to feel something, a new distraction, a rebound conversation, a way to validate that he's still got it. But it doesn't land the same because your absence didn't just remove attention, it removed emotional security. And what's really fascinating is how men often experience this loss differently than women. A lot of women process emotion in real time. They feel it, talk about it, reflect on it while it's happening. But many men tend to delay that processing. It's only in the quiet moments, when they're alone, late at night, or when something reminds them of you, that it really hits. That's when they begin to wonder, was I too casual? Did I take her for granted? Did she actually walk away? For real, that shift is important because it marks the move from ego to emotion. He's no longer just wondering where you went. He's starting to think about what he lost. And this is where, if there was something real there, the connection becomes clearer in his mind. Because with no more noise, no more constant messages, no more validation, he's left with the truth. And the truth is, when someone valuable walks out quietly, it leaves an echo. It lingers, and suddenly he's not just missing the texts or the calls. He's missing you. He remembers your laugh, the way you always knew when something was off, even when he didn't say a word. The things you used to do that made him feel seen in a way he rarely admits he craves. He begins to feel the absence of emotional substance, not just attention, but depth, and this is the moment where a man begins to realize that not every woman brings that to the table, not every connection leaves this kind of mark. Now this is where things get interesting, because he starts reflecting, not because you pushed him, not because you guilted him, but because your silence forced him to. He's left alone with his thoughts. And for the first time, he's seeing the version of you that he used to take for granted as rare, maybe even irreplaceable. He may not admit this out loud. A lot of men don't. Pride still gets in the way. But internally, there's a shift, and sometimes that shift is what makes him reach out, not just with a lazy message, but with genuine curiosity, maybe even a little vulnerability. He might ask how you've been, or he might admit that he's been thinking. He won't necessarily say everything you want to hear, but there's a softness, a realness that wasn't there before. Of course, this doesn't happen with every man. Some people just miss the attention, but the ones who truly had something with you, they don't just notice the silence, they feel it, and when that happens, they don't just miss your presence, they miss the part of themselves that only came alive when they were with you. And that's the difference. When your absence becomes the moment he starts recognizing your emotional value, that's when you know your silence did what words couldn't. So now he's no longer just confused or slightly unsettled. Now he's feeling the loss. He's starting to realize that your absence isn't a tactic. It's not a test. It's a shift. You've changed something fundamental in the dynamic between you two. And when that realization hits, something happens internally for him, something most people don't see coming. What started out as power on his end, his comfort, his confidence, his sense of control, starts to erode, and slowly, almost without him noticing, that power turns into panic. In the beginning, he was sure you'd come back. Maybe you'd cave and send a text. Maybe you'd check his story, like a few posts, drop a breadcrumb to show you still cared, but nothing came, not even a whisper, and in that void, the narrative he was holding on to begins to unravel. Because now he's not just noticing your absence. He's being confronted with the possibility that he's lost access to you, and that's a very different feeling. It's like when someone's always been there and suddenly they're not. You don't just miss the interaction. You start to question your place in their world. You start asking yourself, wait, was I wrong about how secure this was? Was she ever as into me as I thought? Or did I mess this up? And that's the moment the panic sets in. But here's the thing about panic. It doesn't always look the way you expect it to. It's not always dramatic. In fact, a lot of the time it comes in subtle, almost calculated moves. He might suddenly like one of your photos out of nowhere. Or you'll get a random, casual message like, "Hey, saw something today that reminded me of you." That's not always vulnerability. That's him trying to reestablish the link, to see if the door is still open. He doesn't want to look desperate, but he's no longer relaxed. There's a tension in his approach now, a kind of urgency hiding beneath the surface of nonchalance. And if you don't respond, or if you respond differently, more detached, more composed, it throws him off even more. Because what he was banking on was familiarity. He thought you'd engage like you used to, that the pattern would resume, but it doesn't. You've changed the script, and now, for the first time, he's not in control of the story. He's chasing clarity, chasing reassurance, chasing you. This is where many women start to feel empowered, and rightfully so, because now the tables have turned, but it's so important that you don't mistake his reaction for resolution. Panic can look like love, especially when you've been starved of attention, but they're not the same. Just because he's reaching out, just because he's suddenly present, doesn't mean he's ready. It just means he's uncomfortable. There's a huge difference between a man who wants to reconnect and a man who doesn't like how it feels to lose you. This stage is where your silence really proves its power, because it holds up a mirror to him. And not every man can handle what he sees. If his interest was shallow, he might try a few gestures, throw a couple of texts your way, and when he doesn't get the reaction he's used to, he'll back off. That's not love leaving, it's entitlement being denied, But if he lingers, if he stays curious, reflective, and shows up differently, then maybe the panic has become something more meaningful. Maybe it's opened a door to growth. But that's not something you have to rush to figure out, because here's what I want you to remember. Just because a man is uncomfortable doesn't mean it's your job to soothe him, especially not when he's never fully shown up for you in the way you needed. When someone starts to feel the loss of you, not the convenience of you, but the real emotional version of you, it will either activate their growth or expose their inability to rise. And this is the moment where you have to do the hardest thing of all, nothing. You have to sit in the discomfort of not rescuing him from the consequences of his own behavior, because for so long, maybe you were the one who always reached out first. Maybe you were the one trying to fix things, decode mixed signals, prove your worth through effort. But now the silence is doing the work, and if he's truly meant to be in your life, he'll rise to meet you. Not just with words, not just with gestures, but with genuine presence and clarity. Until then, don't let panic disguised as interest fool you. Don't confuse noise for substance, and above all, don't mistake a reaction for a realization. Because the man who truly sees you won't just chase your presence. He'll respect your distance and work to close it with purpose. By the time you've stayed silent long enough, by the time you've held your ground and given nothing but space, something inevitable happens. He reaches a crossroads. That silence, that emotional distance, has had time to settle in, and now he's left with only two options. Either he begins to genuinely reconnect with you, or he starts to sit with a slow, gnawing regret that he didn't take you seriously until it was too late. This is the point where clarity begins to surface, not just for him, but for you too, because by now you're not just waiting for a message or checking your phone hoping he's noticed. You're starting to see what his behavior in your absence really says. And so is he. The difference is you've had time to strengthen your peace. He's just beginning to reckon with the impact of your withdrawal. If what you had was real, if there was depth, connection, even if it was messy or unspoken, he's going to feel it hard. And that feeling won't go away with distraction or denial. It shows up in the quiet moments when he's lying in bed late at night and he remembers the version of himself that felt most at ease with you. Or the way you understood him when he couldn't even articulate what was wrong. That's when the regret starts to creep in. It doesn't come all at once, it builds slowly, and when it does, it's not just about the loss of a person. It's about the loss of potential, of what could have been if he'd paid attention sooner. Now, here's what's important to understand. When a man begins to truly feel that loss, he doesn't come back looking for attention. He comes back looking for connection. He's not testing the waters. He's stepping into them, and that kind of return doesn't sound like a breadcrumb message or a late night hey. It sounds like, I've been thinking. I see now what I didn't see before. He might not get the words perfect. He might stumble a bit, but you'll feel the shift in energy, because it comes with humility, it comes with effort, and most importantly, it comes with consistency. But not every man will make it to this point. And that's where the silence does its second job. It reveals who he really is when he's not being fed your energy anymore. For some men, the absence becomes too confronting. They realize, maybe too late, that they weren't ready for the kind of woman you are. Maybe they thought they were. Maybe they enjoyed the benefits of your presence without really honoring it. But when faced with the responsibility of showing up for it, they disappear, and that's okay. Because the silence you've maintained wasn't about punishing him. It was about protecting your peace. You weren't trying to manipulate a reaction. You were stepping away from chaos, from mixed signals, from the exhausting pattern of trying to earn affection that should have been freely given. You were choosing clarity over confusion, and in that clarity, one of two things happens. He steps forward with a deeper awareness, or he fades out, revealing the truth that was always hiding behind his comfort. The beautiful part is, you don't have to chase either outcome. You're no longer performing for love. You're no longer trying to decode his behavior or waiting for the perfect message. You've let go of needing to be chosen, and instead, you've chosen yourself. And ironically, that's when you become most magnetic, because you're no longer afraid of what happens if he never returns. You're at peace either way. Some men will come back with new eyes, not because they fear losing you, but because they finally see you. They'll recognize the difference between someone who made them feel good and someone who made them want to be better. And if they come back with that energy, with actions that match their words, with respect that wasn't there before, then maybe, just maybe, there's something worth exploring again. But if they don't, if they let you slip away without ever really fighting for you, then you've won too, because the silence showed you what noise was never able to tell you. It showed you who's ready and who isn't, who values you and who just values the way you made them feel, and that clarity is everything, because at the end of the day, your peace is not negotiable, your love is not a performance, and your presence, when given freely, is a gift, not a guarantee. Let the silence do what it's meant to do. Let it reveal the truth you were too close to see. Let it invite only those who are brave enough to meet you where you are not where they feel most comfortable. When he either reaches out with real intent or disappears in quiet regret, you'll know the silence gave you the answer you needed all along.